In terms of questions, Michael, this first question dropped in during your segment. It was just asking for your opinion on if you found there is a point, whether discussed in literature or in the cases that you've handled, at which an economist could conclude that there is a sufficient correlation to support, quote, price structure. Now, that dropped in during your segment, Mike, but it is open to everyone, so perhaps you want to lead us off.
Sure, I'll lead it off to the others. I mean, I do think that question, should always be grounded in the facts of the case. It's difficult to draw a general conclusion about that because, there might be instances where there's a particular analysis that's conducted and it's so overwhelmingly pointing in a particular direction that, an economist couldn't sort of credibly take a contrary position that it doesn't show price structure. But I think it's something Rainer said, well, the world is complicated, and usually where we live is in a much more complicated place where you don't have analyses sort of uniformly pointing in a single direction. And so, there could certainly be an instance where, everybody can look at an analysis and agree that price structure exists. But, my experience is having worked on quite a few of these cases, a lot of times we're somewhere in the middle. And so we really have to look at what exactly is being correlated with what else.
Thank you so much for that, Mike. This next question dropped in for our two speakers from Paul Weiss. Craig, Bethlehem. How are antitrust settlements typically received by the injured parties, and do putative class members often object to the settlements that are offered?
Got it. I can take that one. It's a good question. I mean, it will always depend on what the nature of the settlement is, but it is not at all unusual for putative class members to object to settlements. Putative class members will look at things like the amount of attorney's fees. They may object as to whether they believe the terms of the settlement are sufficiently generous or fair. It is worth noting that obviously a settlement has to undergo a fairness analysis by the court, and the court needs to independently assess whether it considers the settlement to be fair, and in doing that process will take into account the specific views of objectors. And courts have rejected settlements based on objections that have been put forth by objectors.
Thank you so much. We'll close with this question. Rainer, it dropped in during your segment, but it is open to everybody. And it was just asking, do overcharges have to be, quote, statistically significant for a class member to be considered injured?
That's a really good question. I think from an economic perspective, for me, the answer is yes. Right? If plaintiff's burden is to show that there was impact, you have to show it with some degree of confidence. And the way that you do that within the context of a statistical model is to test for statistical significance. Right? So if an overcharge is not statistically significant, what that means is simply that you can't say with any confidence that it was not zero. So that's my perspective, at least.